Well, let's speak now to General Lord Richard Dannatt, former Chief of the General Staff. Lord Dannatt, it's always good to speak with you. Thank you for making the time to speak to us this Sunday. What do you make of where this discussion finds itself at the moment? We heard Johnny Reynolds there saying all the Cabinet are on side, that they need to increase defence spending.
Well, it's very welcome if that's what the Cabinet's thinking. Now, of course, we all understand that the Chancellor has got many calls on the national budget, but I think as the mood music is now turning to, people realise that actually our security and our defences and our deterrent capability is a very high priority. You could actually argue it's the highest priority. And it's academic over the last few years, but the last 3 years, since there's been a vicious ground war in Europe, a dictator, an aggressive dictator like Vladimir Putin, frankly, it's a wake-up call. And so not only are we quite properly supporting Ukraine, but we've got to make sure that the time that they are buying us is used wisely, and that we and other European countries increase our defence spending, increase our defence capability in order to deter further aggression from Vladimir Putin. And also, listening to the mood music coming across the Atlantic, Donald Trump is not unreasonably saying, come on, you Europeans, take more responsibility for our own security and don't rely on us. So, yeah, it's an important subject, important topic, and I'm glad that it may be that the wind is just changing more towards a willingness to spend more on defence.
I wonder, Lord Dannatt, do you think it's a bit late in the day, though? This war has been ongoing now for 3 years. We've known that there needs to be an increase in spending, surely, from your time in the army, that we knew that we needed to increase the spending for the armed forces.
Well, it is a bit late, but people like me have been saying we've got to spend more on defence for a great many years. The problem which we've been living with since the end of the Cold War is successive governments have enjoyed taking a peace dividend and have been spending less and less on an annual basis on defence. And if you don't invest in defence, then the equipment that we have becomes old, it becomes obsolete, and our overall capability goes down. Now, Donald Trump has been talking about we should be spending 5% of GDP on defence. Now, that isn't a figure he's just plucked out of the air. That's what we were spending in this country on defence in the mid-late 1980s at the height of the Cold War. And because we were spending that much on defence and providing that degree of military capability, we deterred the Cold War from ever becoming hot. So that's the reality. We've just got to spend more, pay a larger premium for our own security, and not frankly waste any more time.
Lord Dannatt, you and I have spoken about this before, and I often ask you what figure we think we need to get to. Trump has said 5%. I think the polls are spending 4.7%. Where do you think we will end up settling?
Well, you could make a case, as I've just done, to say that getting back towards 5% is not winding them up. And that's a huge amount of money. And frankly, the Ministry of Defence couldn't handle that very, very quickly. But the conversation needs to move now speedily through 2.5% to 3% to 3.5% would be a good mark to aim to get to over the next 2, 3 or 4 years, and then see where we are. But potentially, we may have to go up to 4 or 5%. But frankly, having an argument about moving 2.3% to 2.5%, that's fiddling while Rome burns, frankly.
And Lord Dannatt, look, you have, as you rightly point out, always made the case for more military spending, but this is slightly outside of your remit. How do you then persuade the public that needs to happen? As we've seen, there's been a hot war in Europe for the past 3 years. People have been aware of that case, but has the case been properly made by politicians that we now ourselves need to sacrifice some things to make sure that the money is there for defence spending?
Well, you and your colleagues confront politicians on a daily basis. And frankly, it's up to them to make use of the media, whether it's the television media, social media, the print media, to change the narrative and get it across to people in our country that, yes, our government is going to take their security very seriously. There is a major problem in Europe at the present moment. So I'm afraid, as much as we would like to have more money being spent on health and social care and hospitals and schools and national infrastructure, we may have to tighten our belts on those things and be prepared to spend more on defence. And frankly, if it means that taxes have got to go up a bit, Rachel Reeves should not shy away from that. We are in difficult times, and we've all got to shoulder some of that burden.
And we are in the period of a defence review, aren't we? George Robertson is leading that at the moment. Where do you think the money needs to be spent? We're in a very different sort of military age. I think there was reporting just this week that the most people in Ukraine in the fighting there recently have been killed by drone.
Well, yes, they have. Warfare has a history of invention and counter-invention, and technology moves on. So we've got to invest in many of the new technologies, of which drones are part of that. But actually, drones are only an aspect of modern warfare. A drone is then linked to a shooter with modern communications. So it's a system of systems that we have to invest in. But I think the other thing which is difficult for chancellors and secretaries of state of defence to realise is that just because we're investing in new technologies, it doesn't mean to say that the old technologies, the old equipments, are no longer valid. What we are seeing in the war in Ukraine is a combination of high-tech warfare and also down-to-earth, bloody bayonet fighting, gutter fighting, if you like, from one trench to another. So the old ways of warfare are still there. I mean, battle tanks are still required, self-propelled artillery is still required, but so are modern methods of warfare. And then, of course, we have to accept that we need more fast jets, we need more activity in space and cyberspace. And we also, being an island nation, need to make sure that we've got sufficient destroyers and frigates to patrol the sea lanes of the world. 95% of our trade comes through the sea. So I'm afraid whichever way you look at it, we need to spend more on defence in the naval, air and land domains, as well as space and cyberspace.
I mean, Lord Dannatt, that's all and more plus, isn't it, really? That's absolutely everything there. You know, so that's more soldiers, that's more tanks, that's more guns, more artillery shells. And you mentioned, you know, getting to 5% of the amount of money that would unlock. And I've heard this argument now for the past few days, that if we got to that point, then the defence industrial base wouldn't be able to keep up. Is that a mistake? Have we missed out there? Because there's been lots of talk about us getting to having enough stuff being made.
Well, you see, here's the rub. Until governments decide to commit more money, defence industry, being basically private industry, won't commit to increase its production lines, won't build new factories. But as soon as the money is there and the Ministry of Defence is willing to place contracts, then industry will react very quickly. Of course, if necessary, we could buy off the shelf, but we don't need to do that. British industry could accelerate, could increase its productive capability really quite quickly, but it won't do so until the money is there and contracts are being let.
Now, you'll know that there are calls from the US. It's being reported that we should be buying more equipment from there. Is there a danger in sort of tying ourselves into that kind of commitment with a president like Trump, who I think it's fair to say can be mercurial on these sort of things?
Well, there's a balance to be struck here. If we need stuff quickly, and I've already just been saying that I think British industry can react pretty quickly, but if we need more stuff quickly than British industry can produce, then we may have to buy off the shelf, and that invariably means buying American. Not entirely. There are other countries in Europe whose defence industries are pretty sharp and are pretty capable. But it is a marketplace, but the marketplace starts ticking when the money is committed and the money is made available. And then it's up to the procurement processes and the Ministry of Defence to use the money wisely to buy the equipment that we need, to make sure we recruit and train the number of soldiers, sailors, airmen that we require, to make sure we've got the deterrent capability that this country needs to play its part as a European member of NATO for our collective European security.
Well, I'm glad you brought us on to that, because that's my final point, Lord Dannatt, as well. There's going to be a summit held this week, isn't there, on specifically that. We heard just yesterday from Volodymyr Zelensky talking about there being an army of Europe. Your thoughts on that as an idea? It's not a new one, but whether or not that is a starter at all, and what Europe needs to do collectively to make sure it has the defence capability it needs and doesn't have to rely on the United States.
Well, I respect Volodymyr Zelensky hugely and agree with most things that he said. On this issue, I'm afraid I disagree with him. We have a European army. It's actually NATO. Most of the countries that are friendly to us and are supporting Ukraine and are opposing Russia are already NATO members. That is the military alliance that works. It's where we're used to working together. We don't need to create another European army. And That said, of course, we do need to increase our defence spending and be less reliant on America. Now, it's really important that we keep America in NATO, but equally we've got to listen to what Donald Trump is saying, that Europe has got to take more responsibility for its own security, and we rely less on the Americans. And that means in some areas like strategic airlift, some of the more complicated command and control structures, logistics, which the Americans supply, enablers they're called in the trade, Europe may well have to stand up and procure more of those for ourselves and not rely unnecessarily or unduly on American enablers. So there's a lot of work to be done here. We've got a European army, it's called NATO.
Yeah, we're at the beginning of all of this, aren't we? All right, Lord Dannatt, always good to get your time and your thoughts and expertise on this matter. Thanks so much for being with us.
Thanks.